The wonderful thing about capitalism is that ultimately the market decides what gets to be successful and what doesn't. And if the garbage that you produce fails to satisfy their needs, then guess what? They're gonna go somewhere else and find someone who can actually give them what they want. Like South Korea, which has been on an absolute fucking roll with movies like Train to Busan and Parasite, and excellent TV shows like Squid Game, which basically caused the whole of Netflix to go into meltdown for a couple of weeks. But there's another lesser known show that came out not long after, a show that did for the zombie genre what Squid Game did for survival drama, a show called All of Us Are Dead. Not exactly a promising title, but believe me, the show itself more than makes up for the dodgy naming conventions, delivering a compelling, well-constructed, and solidly directed story about a zombie outbreak seen through the eyes of a group of South Korean high school students. The first episode introduces us to the show's pretty extensive cast, who are all students at the fictional Hyosan High School in South Korea. They're your typical mix of jocks, geeks, rich kids, poor kids, popular kids, social outcasts, bullies and victims, and all their little teenage dramas and relationships that seem so unimportant gradually get magnified as the series progresses, bringing some of them together at crucial moments or driving a wedge between others, often with deadly results. You also get a bit of insight into how different Korean culture is from our own, like how the guys get embarrassed and kind of freaked out by the absolutely gorgeous girls that are clearly trying to flirt with them, or how the students show up in full dress uniform every day and actually seem concerned about getting good grades, or how this dude is somehow considered obese. Fuck me, you should take a look at the average high school in Scotland, mate. Between the junkies, teenage pregnancies, and bloated land whales raised on a diet of deep fried pizza, a good zombie apocalypse would be a welcome fucking distraction. Anyway, when one of the students wanders into the school science lab and gets bitten by an infected test animal, shit rapidly begins to go wrong. Before you know it, she's passed out and reanimated as a flesh-hungry zombie, biting and killing anything that she can get her hands on. Her victims naturally go down the same path, and, well, you can pretty much guess what happens from there. The infection spreads through the school faster than a case of chlamydia and quickly spills out into the wider city beyond. Before you know it, the place has been reduced to scattered groups of survivors hiding out in classrooms and service areas, while hordes of zombies roam the corridors looking for fresh victims. So the story quickly becomes your standard survival horror setup. Find a way to fight or avoid the zombies, link up with other survivors and get the fuck out of there before you all turn into walking corpses. I mean, it's hardly the most original premise ever, and a lot of the standard tropes from the genre are present and correct here. The asshole who considers personal grudges more important than mutual survival. The vital object that has to be retrieved from a heavily infested area. The failed rescue attempt. That one guy who gets bitten but keeps it secret from the others. The selfless hero who sacrifices himself to save the rest of the group. Like I say, it's all here in one way or another, but what makes All of Us Are Dead interesting is the way it subtly plays with some of these tropes, doing things that you don't often see in stories like this. Like the characters who get infected with the zombie virus but somehow retain their memories and humanity, raising interesting questions about whose side they're really on. Or the military actually being pretty smart and competent, making good tactical decisions to help contain the outbreak. And then there's the way the show weaves in smaller, more personal stories into the overarching narrative, the way the existing relationships, rivalries and prejudices of the various characters starts to influence their behaviour more and more as the pressure ramps up. The little moments of friendship, loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, conflict and redemption are what gives the show its emotional heart, and there's some genuinely poignant and tragic moments woven through the story. The infected mother who ties herself to a railing before she turns, keeping her newborn baby safe as long as possible. The teacher who gives up her own life to save a student she barely knows. The kids who use a camcorder to record their final messages to their families, not knowing if they'll see them again or even if any of them are still alive. The military general who authorises airstrikes on civilian areas to slow the virus, knowing innocent people are gonna die. That being said, there's also welcome moments of levity and humanity to balance this stuff out, like the idiot YouTuber who sneaks into the quarantine city to bag himself more views, only to get a bit more action than he bargained for. Fuck me, I know plenty of people who are dumb enough to actually do this. Or the kids who waste a ridiculous amount of time debating what SOS actually stands for, or allowing petty gripes and grudges to resurface useless at the most inappropriate moments. These aren't highly trained soldiers or survivalists, they're just dumb high school students, not particularly resourceful or good at fighting, although I have to say Cheong-san is pretty fucking badass at times. But the point is, these guys are pretty much unprepared for the situation they're in, they don't always make the best decisions under pressure, and they're usually working with pretty limited resources. Jesus, even a single zombie can be a major threat for them. The end result is a group of characters that feels particularly vulnerable and unprepared for what they're up against, so that you feel genuine tension when they're in danger. And because the script takes the time to actually flesh them out, you usually feel pretty bad when they start getting killed off. And believe me, it happens a lot in this show. In most horror movies, you can kind of pick out the people that are going to get killed off fairly early, the characters that don't quite get as much development, the selfish assholes that you just know are going to betray the others and die in the process, the high-strung cowards that are probably going to panic at a crucial moment and get themselves killed. But in this show, there's no particular safety net for anyone. Good people can and will die, while ruthless and selfish characters often survive, precisely because they put themselves ahead of others. It's an interesting approach that means you can never really relax, because basically anyone could die at any time. The plot unfolds in mostly chronological order, but from time to time it'll skip backwards to fill in important details or expand on what happened to certain people. Like, two characters might get separated during a big confrontation and their fates are apparently left up to the audience to decide. Just another casualty of a chaotic situation where people can easily disappear and never be seen again. But then a couple of episodes later, they'll suddenly show up unexpectedly and the narrative will jump backward to explain what happened to them and how they ended up there. It's a neat way of keeping the viewer in suspense without turning the narrative into a convoluted mess, unlike some shows I could mention. And it's cool because every time you think the writers might have dropped the ball and gotten sloppy, there it is to pick things up again. All of this stuff is helped along immensely by excellent performances from a talented young cast. I can't say I'm familiar with any of them, but goddamn, they really sell the emotion of the moment, giving us a collection of quirky, funny, likeable characters that you really want to see make it out, even though you know most of them probably won't. They actually change and grow as people over the course of the story, and by the end they look about 10 years older than when they started. Coming in the wake of the unspecified virus of unknown origin, it's tough not to see the parallels with real-world events reflected in this show. The fear and confusion of facing a sudden epidemic that nobody really understands, the paranoia of wondering whether the people around you might be secretly infected, and the exhaustion of finally coming out the other side, worn down by tough experiences. Fortunately, it doesn't try to make any particular statement on real-world issues like this. It's more interested in telling its own story, and how that story impacts its characters than scoring political points. Man, isn't it crazy when a show's just interested in entertaining you instead of trying to push the message? That being said, if I had to level any particular criticisms at it, I'd say it's probably a couple of episodes too long. Some of the scenes where the gang are trapped in a classroom or on a rooftop drag on a little too long and verge on frustrating at times. To be fair, there's usually enough going on elsewhere to keep things moving along, but yeah, it could definitely have been trimmed down a little. The other issue is the cast. Don't get me wrong, like I said earlier, they all give great performances and they're pretty interesting individually. The problem is that there's so fucking many of them that it's hard to keep in mind who everyone is and how they relate to each other. The fact that all the students wear identical uniforms doesn't exactly help the situation either. I mean, this is a problem that kind of corrects itself as the story progresses, if you catch my drift, but it does leave you feeling a bit lost in a sea of characters for the first couple of episodes. Either way though, these are mostly just minor problems in an otherwise excellent show that held my interest from the first bite right until the final scene. And if you enjoyed movies like Train to Busan or 28 Days Later, then I'm pretty sure you'll get a kick out of All of Us Are Deads. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.